So here in chapter 8, which is the end of the chapters we're going to do for exam 2, we're kind of putting everything together now. So this is how we're going to talk about designing pay levels, pay mix, and pay structures based on the information that we're getting from the external market with all of the things that we've learned in the previous chapters about making your internal structure. So you have a lot of major decisions when you're putting the external competitive pay information with the internal structure you've kind of created so that you actually have your pay structure for your organization. So what I'm going to do in the next 3 videos is show what these major decisions are and then how we put these together to create our pay structure. Hopefully, some of this is very technical and it might seem a little confusing, but hopefully, since we went through all of these chapters up till now, this helps kind of put everything together. So it makes sense now how you make that internal structure from all of the work and all of the decisions we've been making up until this point. So the first thing we have to do is specify our competitive pay policy. So do we want to compete with others in the market at the same price? Do we want to lead the market? Do we want to lag the markets? And to do that, to kind of figure out what our external pay policy is going to be, we actually have to have information about what's going on in the external market. And so we do surveys, which are a systematic process of collecting and making judgments about the compensation paid by other employers. And we'll get into more details about surveys in a later video. But these surveys help us provide data on what your competitors are paying for base pay, for example, for similar or even the exact same jobs that you have in your organization. It helps you figure out their pay mix and also what their structures look like in terms of the hierarchy for jobs, particularly in terms of pay. So we have to define the purpose of our survey. And you'll notice this kind of sounds like a lot of the other decisions we've already been making in terms of our internal pay structure and how we were going to actually determine that structure. So in the survey, employers use these surveys for a lot of different reasons. One is to adjust their pay level when competitors change their pay rates. So if you have competitors who are going to start paying more for certain kinds of skills, for example, and you have a skills-based structure, you now have to go back and potentially, at least for some of those jobs, find out what your competitors are paying so that you can keep up with what they're paying if that's your external pay policy. You also you can use this to set the mix of pay forms relative to what's paid by competitors. So a really good example might be if you were in a tech company and your original pay policy was not going to include things like stock options for your employees, but what you find out from a survey or something you want to find out from your survey is what kinds or what forms of pay are employees in other tech companies getting. And you kind of realize that the norm in the tech industry is to give employees stock options so they can make money not just in the base pay or even in the benefits that they earn, but also through the growth of the companies that they're in. Well, if that's what a lot of companies are doing, you may have to actually change your policy to reflect what other companies are doing just to attract new employees or to keep the employees you have. You can use it to establish or price a pay structure, especially one that you've already created, but you're not sure exactly what the market looks like in terms of that pay structure. You can analyze pay-related problems, especially if you have like turnover happening or something's changing in the market suddenly and you need to keep up with that change. And then you can also use it to estimate the labor costs of your market competitors that make the same or similar products or services. And this is really important to understand if you're keeping up, like you have very similar labor costs, or if for some reason you're paying more labor costs than your competitors, you may have to figure out how do I make my employees more productive to either lower those labor costs, or how do I have that increase in labor cost reflected in my pay structure so that I'm not overpaying for the labor cost because it's higher in my company for whatever reason. So why would you adjust your pay structure? And this is a little bit alluded to in the last slide. Many employers use market surveys to validate their job evaluation results. So for example, that job A is worth more than job B. Sometimes what happens though is the job structure that results from your internal job evaluation, the very careful process that you went through to create this internal structure doesn't quite match what competitors are doing. So maybe you pay job A more than job B, but your competitors are actually paying job B more than job A for some reason. Well, you can use that external market information to adjust your pay structure a little bit so that maybe they get paid the same because you have reasons for paying internally one job more than the other, but externally one is gets paid more generally than the other. There's lots of decisions you can make around kind of reconciling those differences between the internal structure you have and the external pay information you're getting. Sometimes, rather than integrating those structures, however, employers might go straight to market surveys to just establish their internal structures. So instead of trying to figure out, like, for example, points for every job and then using those points to create the hierarchy of jobs and then determining pay based on those points, you might just go to the market pricing and be like, well, job A always gets paid more than job B, so that's how we're going to do it in our company. And job A generally gets paid more than this compared to job B in the market, so that's how we're also going to set our pay. If you're going to do that, especially if you're going to rely so much on that external pay information, you have to have accurate information about what your competitors are doing to make informed judgments. If your data is not very good, the decisions you're making are not good, and they're not going to help your company be competitive. You can also do what we call specialized surveys, and specialized surveys focus on a specific pay-related problem, so they're not as big or broad or generic as a general pay survey would be. So they can focus on, for example, targeted groups of employees or jobs. And this is especially useful when you're in a company, and I'm going to give an example of an engineering company. Your engineering company, most of the jobs might be some kind of engineering or science professional jobs, and then you might have management or leadership jobs, but you might have a few people like a patent attorney who works in your in your company. But a patent attorney is a kind of professional, but it's not the same as a scientist or an engineer would be. And so their pay, the external pay, or the what companies are paying for that kind of job might be quite different from the internal structure you have for other kinds of jobs. And so you might actually have a specialized survey just to find out what other people are paying their patent attorneys so that you can be competitive in attracting really good attorneys for your company as well. You also could have other kinds of jobs like secretaries or software engineers or retail sales managers, lots of these kind of supportive jobs that there might be just a few people doing those jobs and they don't really fit into your internal structure really well. That's where external pay information can be really helpful in figuring out how much to pay those people. You also could have increases in turnover very suddenly. This has happened in the last few years for a lot of companies as we're coming out of the pandemic, and pay was increasing very quickly for a lot of different kinds of employees. Many employers had to do a specialized survey to find out what are my competitors paying now, so that I can attract employees or keep the employees I have because turnover was becoming so high. So that would be another good use of a specialized survey. Your third step is that you want to specify the relevant market. And a relevant market includes employers who compete on having the same jobs or skills. The jobs, occupations would be if you have a job-based system. Skills would be if you have a skills-based internal structure. If these employers have employees within the same geographic area because you're literally competing for the same employees to come to your company. Or if they create the same products and services, especially because that gives us information on the labor costs for your competitors that would be useful for helping you figure out if your labor costs are kind of in line with your competitors. Some argue that if you have skills that are tied to a particular industry, your relevant market should just be that industry. So this is very common. Tech is a really good example. Healthcare could be a good example, education, that sort of thing. You want to do this because you need to figure out what your competitors are paying in the market for labor costs and other kinds of costs. Well, labor costs in particular, because you need to figure out how to control your costs if they're higher than your competitors. How do you make your employees more productive? Or if you actually have lower labor costs, you can see this as a competitive advantage and you can use that to attract other employees because you might be able to pay more now because you have lower labor costs than your competitors. The one problem though is if you're in an industry like manufacturing, where you might want to compare yourself to other manufacturers, but a lot of them have jobs that are in other countries where the pay rates are lower. It's very hard to compare your labor costs then because their labor costs will be lower, but that's offset potentially by costs in other areas that you're not getting information about in the survey, such as shipping costs or marketing or something like that. And so then you have to make some decisions about how you're going to compare your labor costs to those for a competitor who might have jobs in lower cost countries. You also can have what are called fuzzy markets. So this happens in new organizations or when you've created new jobs where you've combined skills or you've combined jobs that used to not be combined in the past. So there, a lot of competitors don't have a job that looks just like that job. And so you might have to get some information about a couple or a few different kinds of jobs or jobs with similar skills that may not be exactly the same work to compare to the jobs that you have that you've either combined those jobs or you create a completely new job descriptions that just do not match your competitors. And that forces you to make a lot of decisions then about how you're going to compare that job to the external market since there's nothing specifically like that job that you can get data for.